In just 67 seconds, Louisiana's own poverty statistics would destroy one of its most arrogant representatives. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch when Clay Higgins launched into his condescending lecture about real America and liberal elites who don't understand working people. She didn't need to. She had spent the weekend studying Census Bureau data from his own congressional district, and what she'd found was devastating. The look on Higgins' face when she started reading his district's poverty rankings said everything about the difference between political rhetoric and actual representation. What did those census numbers reveal that made the most bombastic congressman from Louisiana look like he'd never seen his own constituents? At exactly 2:47 p.m. on May 21, 2025, the House Agriculture Committee chamber buzzed with Farm Bill debate tension. Mahogany panels, harsh fluorescent lights, and 24 cameras positioned to capture every moment as representatives discussed rural economic development programs. The air crackled with the usual urban versus rural political electricity that defined American agricultural policy. Jasmine Crockett walked into the hearing room like a prosecutor who'd spent days researching every defendant in the case. Navy blazer pressed to policy perfection. Thick folder of Census Bureau data arranged by devastating relevance. Tablet loaded with Louisiana Department of Health statistics. Her expression was calm, controlled, absolutely lethal. She carried herself like someone who'd discovered the gap between political posturing and constituent reality. Clay Higgins lounged in his committee seat like a congressman carved from pure Louisiana swagger and talk radio confidence. Former sheriff, Trump loyalist, self-proclaimed voice of real America. His flag pin caught the lights as he shuffled through prepared talking points about urban Democrats who don't understand rural values. His practiced scowl suggested he was ready for another day of lecturing liberal elites about working-class authenticity, but today would expose the difference between representing people and simply using them as political props. 3 elements hung in the committee room. Air like gathering storm clouds. The stalled farm bill that Higgins claimed Democrats were sabotaging. His recent media appearances attacking coastal elites. And Crockett's reputation for turning political rhetoric into statistical reality checks. The hearing began with Chairman G.T. Thompson's opening remarks about supporting rural America through agricultural programs. Standard Farm Bill theater. Republican members launched into attacks on democratic socialism and urban ignorance of rural needs. Everything proceeded exactly as Higgins's media team had scripted. Until Crockett challenged his narrative. "Congressman Higgins," she began during her questioning time, "you've spent considerable time today discussing rural economic challenges and democratic failures. I'd like to examine your record of addressing those challenges in your own district." Higgins's scowl deepened into his trademark condescending smile. "Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate your interest, but I don't think someone from Dallas really understands the struggles of Louisiana working families." The dismissive tone was classic. Higgins, part Southern gentleman, part political bully. "Actually, Congressman, I've been studying Louisiana working families quite extensively. Specifically, the families in your district." She opened her folder, revealing not talking points, but comprehensive Census Bureau demographic data. Louisiana's 3rd Congressional District. Your district. Population 7062. 790. Would you like me to share what I learned about their economic situation? Higgins' confidence flickered slightly. "I know my district better than anyone. I'm sure you do. So, you're aware that your district has the 2nd highest poverty rate in Louisiana?" The words landed like a census bomb. According to the American Community Survey, 23.7% of your constituents live below the federal poverty line. That's nearly 1 in 4 people. She held up the first document. For comparison, the national average is 11.4%. Your district's poverty rate is more than double the national average. Higgins' face began changing color. Those numbers are taken out of context. Let's add some context then. Median household income in Louisiana's 3rd district, $42,147. National median, $70,784. Your constituents earn 40% less than the average American. The devastating statistical precision was surgical, relentless, and absolutely verifiable. But it gets worse, she continued, turning to another page. Child poverty in your district, 31.2%. Nearly 1 in 3 children in the district you represent lives in poverty. The committee room had gone completely silent. Even Republican members stopped their usual side conversations. Food insecurity affects 18.4% of households in your district. That's 41,000 people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. She looked directly at Higgins, whose trademark swagger was evaporating in real time. Educational attainment. Only 16.8% of adults in your district have bachelor's degrees, compared to 33.1% nationally. High school graduation rate, 78.3%, well below the national average of 8. Higgins tried to interrupt. Congresswoman, these statistics don't tell the whole story. You're right. Let's tell the whole story. She opened her tablet. Healthcare access. Your district has 2.1 primary care physicians per 1,000 residents. The national average is 8. Your constituents have 1/4 the access to basic medical care as the rest of America. The numerical devastation was complete, but Crockett wasn't finished. Unemployment rate in your district, 7.2%. National rate, 3.7%. Your constituents are twice as likely to be unemployed as the average American. She closed the folder and delivered the kill shot. So when you lecture Democrats about not understanding working families, I have to ask, what exactly have you done for the working families in your own district? Because the data suggests you failed them catastrophically. 67 seconds. That's how long it took from her first question to Higgins' complete humiliation. The committee room erupted in controlled chaos. Republican members demanded points of order. Democratic members tried to hide their amazement at the statistical annihilation. Reporters frantically typed breaking news about the most brutal data-driven takedown in congressional history. But Clay Higgins just sat frozen, staring at Jasmine Crockett like he'd just seen his own political obituary written in Census Bureau numbers. Within minutes, Higgins' district was trending on Twitter. The clip of Crockett methodically destroying Higgins with his own district's poverty statistics went viral across all platforms. Data visualization accounts created infographics showing the devastating comparisons between Higgins' district and national averages. CNN's Jake Tapper led with explosive confrontation in House Agriculture Committee as Louisiana poverty data rocks rural representative. MSNBC's Joy Reid tweeted, "When someone lectures you about working families, sometimes you need to show them what working families actually look like." A Jasmine for US just delivered a masterclass in policy reality. Even Fox News struggled to defend Higgins. Their usual rural America narratives fell flat. When confronted with actual data about rural America's struggles under Republican representation, the afternoon brought a cascade of additional revelations that buried Higgins' credibility completely. The Times-Picayune published a deep dive into Louisiana's 3rd district, confirming every statistic Crockett had cited, and adding even more damaging data about infrastructure decay, environmental health hazards, and economic stagnation. The Lafayette Daily Advertiser obtained records showing Higgins had voted against every major poverty reduction program, rural development initiative, and healthcare expansion that could have helped his constituents. Most damaging was the revelation that Higgins had received over $340,000 in campaign contributions from agricultural corporations. While his district's farmers struggled with debt, climate change impacts, and market volatility, local newspapers that had endorsed Higgins for years began running editorials questioning whether he truly represented his constituents' interests or simply used their struggles as campaign props. By evening, Clay Higgins' reputation as a voice for working-class Louisiana was effectively shattered. The Advocate, Louisiana's largest newspaper, ran an editorial titled, "The Data Doesn't Lie. Higgins has failed his district." The piece detailed how his voting record consistently opposed programs that would have directly benefited his impoverished constituents. Local civil rights organizations began organizing around the poverty data Crockett had revealed. The Louisiana Budget Project released a comprehensive analysis showing how federal programs Higgins had opposed would have lifted thousands of families in his district out of poverty. Most significantly, several Democratic challengers announced they were considering running against Higgins in 2026, citing the statistical evidence of his representation failures. Higgins's response came at 9 p.m. through a Facebook Live video that made everything worse. Instead of addressing the poverty data or proposing solutions, he launched into a rambling attack on liberal elites, using statistics to attack conservative values. The video went viral for all the wrong reasons, with viewers noting that he spent more time attacking Democrats than discussing how to help his struggling constituents. Meanwhile, Crockett appeared on Anderson Cooper 360, looking exactly as composed as she had during the hearing. "Anderson, this isn't about attacking Congressman Higgins personally," she said, her voice steady and measured. "It's about holding representatives accountable for actually representing their constituents, rather than just using them as political props. The poverty statistics you cited were particularly striking. They should be striking to anyone who cares about rural America. When nearly 1 in 4 people in a congressional district lives in poverty, that's not a talking point. That's a crisis requiring actual solutions." Cooper leaned forward. "What's your response to claims this was an unfair attack?" Crockett's slight smile carried the weight of undeniable data. "Census Bureau statistics aren't attacks, Anderson. They're reality. If Congressman Higgins finds his district's poverty data offensive, maybe he should work to change the poverty instead of attacking the messenger." The interview clip garnered 22 million views within 24 hours. 3 weeks later, the broader implications of Crockett's statistical demolition became clear. The House Agriculture Committee, embarrassed by the revelation of rural poverty in a Republican district, passed a series of amendments to the Farm Bill specifically targeting high-poverty rural areas. Programs Higgins had previously opposed now included specific funding for Louisiana's 3rd District. More importantly, Crockett's data-driven approach inspired other Democratic representatives to research poverty and economic conditions in their Republican colleagues' districts. The Crockett research method became a standard opposition research technique for holding representatives accountable to constituent needs, rather than political rhetoric. The moment also sparked a broader conversation about rural representation and whether rural Republicans were actually delivering results for rural constituents. Academic studies began comparing poverty rates, economic development, and quality of life indicators between rural districts represented by Democrats versus Republicans. 6 months later, Clay Higgins announced he would not seek re-election in 2026, citing a desire to return to private life and spend time with family. Political observers noted that his fundraising had collapsed, and several credible Democratic challengers had emerged, all citing the poverty data Crockett had revealed. During his announcement, Higgins made no mention of the statistical humiliation that had effectively ended his political career, but local political reporters noted that he'd been largely invisible in Louisiana media since the May confrontation, avoiding the interviews and town halls that had once been his political lifeblood. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, became a Democratic hero in rural policy circles. Her systematic use of demographic data to expose representation failures was studied in political science programs as a masterclass in accountability politics. The Congressional Black Caucus invited her to lead a comprehensive study of poverty and representation across rural America, examining whether minority representatives were more effective at delivering results for their constituents, regardless of geography. But perhaps the most significant impact was on rural voters themselves. Exit polls in subsequent elections showed that rural constituents increasingly demanded specific data about economic results rather than accepting general rhetoric about fighting for working families. The Higgins Standard became shorthand for the gap between rural rhetoric and rural results, with candidates across the country forced to defend their actual records of poverty reduction and economic development. During a quiet interview with the Rural South magazine 6 months later, Crockett reflected on the day that changed rural political discourse. "People ask if I plan to destroy Clay Higgins' career that day," she said from her Dallas office. "The truth is, I plan to shine light on the reality facing rural Americans who deserve better than political theater. She paused, looking at the census data that had sparked everything. Representative democracy only works when representatives actually know what their constituents are experiencing. Congressman Higgins' problem wasn't that I attacked him. His problem was that he couldn't defend his record of leaving his own people behind. The lasting impact of those 67 seconds continued to reshape rural political discourse. Candidates could no longer rely solely on cultural rhetoric without addressing economic results. Poverty data became as important as polling data in political campaigns. Most importantly, it reminded rural Americans that their representatives could be held accountable for actual results, rather than just agreeable rhetoric. Political representation doesn't always announce itself with flag pins and folksy accents. Sometimes it walks into a committee hearing with Census Bureau data and asks simple questions about who's really being served. What happens when rural rhetoric meets rural reality? What happens when someone claiming to represent working families faces their actual economic record? What happens when political theater confronts statistical truth? The answer was written in 67 seconds that changed rural politics forever. If this story inspired you, don't just scroll, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Here, truth doesn't knock. It enters with data and leaves with accountability. What's the most eye-opening demographic statistic you've learned about your own district? Drop it below.